Today, we continue our exploration of real-life tales of exorcism with the stories of Arne Johnson and Michael Taylor, which inspired the 2021 film Conjuring 3, The Exorcism of Gina, which appeared live on ABC in 1991, and the story of Emma Schmidt, which inspired The Exorcism of Anna Eklund in 2016. Welcome to History, Mystery, and the Unexplained, the show where we look at everything from true crime to cryptids, the paranormal, and beyond. Before we get started, please like, subscribe, follow, or whatever on the platform of your choice. And also be sure to give us a review. I'd love to hear what you think. The 1974 story of Michael Taylor is one that is truly disturbing. It involves SA and DA as well as a horrific crime scene. If these topics are triggering to you, I highly recommend skipping this story. Timestamps are in the show notes. Michael Taylor and his wife Christine were a fairly normal couple in Ossett, an English country town of West Yorkshire. They lived there with their 5 children, and it's noted that they were decidedly non-religious in an otherwise Christian neighborhood. Michael suffered from chronic back pain from an old injury, which caused him to struggle to maintain employment. Because of this, he had minor bouts of depression. A friend of his, Barbara Wardman, felt that the church might help him with his mental struggles. Barbara introduced him to a church group called the Christian Fellowship Group. It was run by a 21-year-old charismatic pastor, Marie Robinson. Michael became wholly absorbed in the group, learning the practices of the faith and becoming an integral part of their congregation. Not only did Michael attend more and more meetings, but he would join Pastor Robinson in using the power of God to exorcise people, absolving them of their sins. They would both speak in tongues. In fact, Taylor and Robinson spent a lot of time together. It got to the point that the congregation, as well as his wife Christine, begun to suspect that the two were sharing more than just the Word of God. They would at times engage in private rituals where they would stay up all night making the sign of the cross to one another to banish the evil power of the full moon. When Michael was home with his family, he was irritable and argumentative. He was not the friendly neighbor and family man he had been before he found the church. It got to the point that Christine barged into a meeting of the Christian Fellowship Group to confront her husband and his alleged lover. He yelled at him, and in return, he turned his fury on Robinson. His features changed, and he became more beast-like. He dove towards Marie, and the other members of the congregation had to hold him back. Robinson said that she and Taylor both begun to speak in tongues while screaming at one another. I was on the verge of death, she said, and I seemed to come to my senses. I knew that only the name of Jesus would save me, and I just started saying it over and over again. Jesus. Christine joined in, calling on the name of Jesus, and it was only in calling in his name that I was not killed. The next day, Marie Robinson and the church fully forgave Michael Taylor for his actions. But even if Robinson, the church, and the Taylors could all turn the other cheek, the congregation could not forget. Father Peter Vincent of the Anglican Church and Methodist Reverend Raymond Smith joined together to perform an exorcism on Michael Taylor, believing that he was under the influence of demonic forces. At midnight on October 5th, 1974, they performed an exorcism at the St. Thomas's Church in Barnsley. The congregation of the Christian Fellowship was in attendance to witness the rite. It was said to last around 8 hours. Michael was tied to the floor. He bit and screamed and growled. He spoke in tongues and convulsed. The priests said that they found 40 demons in him, each representing a deadly sin, such as blasphemy, lewdness, and carnal knowledge. After 8 hours, of holy water and prayers, everyone was exhausted. At 8 a.m., Father Vincent wanted to call it off for the day so everyone could go home and get some sleep. One woman in the congregation, a minister's wife, Margaret Smith, said that she had a vision that Michael would kill Christine if they left. She begged the two priests to finish the exorcism, insisting that her vision was from God. The priests were exhausted. They admitted that Michael still was possessed. He was not entirely free of demons, but insisted that things could wait till tomorrow, after everyone had had a chance to rest. Less than 2 hours later, at approximately 9:45 a.m., Officer Ian Walker turned his patrol car onto the quiet Osset neighborhood. He drove down the Taylor's streets, finding a man completely naked and covered in blood from head to toe. The man, of course, was Michael Taylor, and the blood was that of his wife. When Officer Walker asked Michael what was happening, he responded with, "They primed me for this last night. They tried to bring me peace of mind, but instead they filled me with the devil. It was within her. Oh God, it used her. I used my love. I destroyed the evil within her. It had to be done. Oh hell, I loved that woman. No, please God. No, please God." He then sat down on the curb, curled up in the fetal position, screaming that he was covered in the blood of Satan. After Walker got Michael to safety in an ambulance, he went to the Taylor house, finding the police were already at the scene. The home was covered in blood. Christine was unrecognizable. Michael gouged out her eyes, tore out her tongue, and peeled most of the flesh from her face down to the bone. When he was finished with his wife, he turned his attention to the family dog, doing much the same to the small poodle. Thankfully, the children were not home that day. He most likely would have done the same to them had they not taken them to his mother's before the exorcism. At the hospital, police interrogated Michael about the events leading up to the murder, and Michael told them about the exorcism. It was a night, he said. They danced around me and burned my cross because that was tainted with evil. They had me in the church all night. Look at my hands. I was banging on the floor. The power was in me. I couldn't get rid of it, and neither could they. They were too late. I was compelled by a force within me to destroy everything living in the house. Michael could remember nothing of the murder itself, but after it was finished, he said he felt released. I am released. He said it is done. The evil in her has been destroyed. His trial took place in March of 1975 in Leeds Crown Court. His defense team blamed the church. A clinical psychologist testified in his defense, stating that his actions were the direct result of trauma he suffered that night. He had pre-existing mental issues that were triggered by the exorcism. His lawyer, Harry Ognall, said that misguided churchmen should be held responsible. He said it was neurotics feeding neuroses to a neurotic. The courts found Michael Taylor innocent by reason of insanity. He spent 2 years at Broadmoor's Mental Hospital and another 2 at the Bradford Royal Infirmary. Despite the words of Taylor's very outspoken lawyer after the trial, stating that Taylor was merely a cipher, that the guilt lies in religion, none of the clergymen were ever brought to trial. From the time that he was released until 2005, Michael made at least 4 attempts on his own life. In 2005, he was back in the news and back in the court system for inappropriate conduct and sexual harassment towards an underage girl. During the week he spent in custody, he displayed similar psychiatric problems to the ones he displayed in 1975. He spent a short time in a psych ward for his second offense, but was ultimately charged with only 3 years of community service and outpatient psychiatric treatment. Personally, I try to keep my views out of these stories. I am here to tell you a tale and not to pass judgment. But there are times that things go too far. I feel that this was a failure on every level. The church, the court system, the mental health facilities, the mental health facility most of all. The number one reason people are institutionalized is because they are a threat to themselves or others. In Michael's case, he killed someone. He was obviously a threat to others. Even if we say that the church, or specifically the exorcism, drove him to it, we have to acknowledge that he was mentally unstable to begin with. 4 years seems like a really short time to stabilize someone who was at that level of mental illness. The fact that he tried to take his own life after he was released, the first time he tried to take his own life, he should have been reevaluated, if not reinstitutionalized. When he touches a young girl, that's not when you say that you need continued psychiatric help. He should have already had that. I'm going to stop there because that's not what this episode is about. It's just something that I felt needed to be said. Let's move on to the next story. Michael Taylor's lawyers weren't the only ones to use the devil made me do it defense. In 1981, Arne Johnson's defense team attempted to use the argument that he was innocent due to demonic possession. As the story goes, 19-year-old Arne Johnson was moving in with his girlfriend, Debbie Glatzel, in Brookfield, Connecticut. The two had gone to clean up a rental property along with Debbie's 12-year-old brother, David. Well, there, David said he saw an old man appear before him and start pushing him and threatening him. The young couple figured David was making up stories to get out of cleaning and told him to get back to work. As time went on, David saw the old man again, and he appeared to David looking like a demon. He threatened to steal his soul and warned the family not to move in. No one else ever saw the old man or the demon, but they did hear noises coming from the attic, and David started to exhibit strange behaviors. He had night terrors. Scratches and bruises appeared on his body. The family first sought a Catholic priest to bless the home, but the strange activity continued, and it terrified them enough to move away. But that didn't stop David's behavior. 12 days after the initial incident, Debbie and David's mother, Judy, called the paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. For those not familiar with these two, they are the inspiration for Amityville Horror, the Conjuring series, the Annabelle series. Ed Warren is also the only demonologist recognized by the Catholic Church. Judy, the Warrens, and several priests worked to get the backing of the church to perform an exorcism on David. Lorraine stated that she saw a black mist appear next to David. His behavior also seemed to escalate around this time. He would growl and hiss and speak in guttural voices, reciting passages from the Bible, convulsing and having spasms. Debbie and Judy also described an incident where invisible hands seemed to choke David, leaving red marks on his neck. Although a full exorcism could not be performed without a bishop's approval, Ed and Lorraine performed minor rites to fight the 42 demons they believed possessed the child. It was during one of these exorcisms, performed by the Warrens, that the demon, or one of the demons, jumped from David into Arne. In the Netflix documentary, The Devil on Trial, Arne describes how I yelled at this thing at the top of my lungs. I said, "Leave the little kid alone. Take me on. I'm here. Take me on." I felt a coldness come over me, ice cold. He goes on to say that Lorraine looked at him in horror and said, "Oh my God, what did you do?" The story then jumps forward 5 months. Debbie and Arne got a new place close to Debbie's work. They were renting a house from her boss, Alan Bono. On February 16th, 1981, Arne, his sister Wanda, who was 15, his other sister Janice, 13, and Debbie's 9-year-old cousin Mary all went to visit Debbie at the kennel where she worked as a dog groomer. Bono took everyone out to lunch at a local bar where he drank heavily and became intoxicated. They returned to the kennel, and Debbie worked for a while before the girls got hungry again, and she ran them out to get pizza before everyone went home. She could feel the tension in the air between the intoxicated Bono and her boyfriend, and she wanted to make the food run as quick as possible. Shortly after they returned, things went south. Bono grabbed the youngest child and wouldn't let go. He didn't want anyone to leave. Debbie snatched Mary away from Bono, and the youngest two ran to the car. Wanda pulled on Arne to try to get him away from the situation while Debbie stood between the two men. Arne started to growl like a dog and pulled a 5-inch knife from his pocket. In Wanda's words, something shiny flashed in the air, and then it stopped. It was over. Arne walked into the woods, staring straight ahead. Bono slumped onto the ground. He had 4 large knife wounds, one stretched from his stomach to the base of his heart. Arne's lawyers tried possession defense, but the judge threw it out. But nonetheless, it got picked up by the press and still seemed to influence the case. Officially, they pled self-defense. He was convicted of manslaughter and given 10 to 20 years, but he served only 5. To this day, Arne says he remembers nothing of the murder. He describes Bono as a friend and says that he didn't hurt anyone. Blacking out and not remembering what happened is certainly not proof of demonic possession. I personally know 2 people who have had dissociative episodes and committed crimes. Not anything as serious as murder, mind you, but it could happen. Many people block out traumatic events as well. And it's mentioned that Arne and Bono were drinking heavily. That could certainly cause blacking out. The events resulted in a book deal, The Devil in Connecticut, written by Gerald Brittle and Lorraine Warren, which inspired several movies. There was also at least 3 different documentaries. I want to mention that Judy signed a contract with the Warrens, allowing for them to write the book, and that Debbie and Arne have never denied any of the events in the case or the fictionalized version. Carl, one of Debbie and David's brothers, sued Brittle and the Warrens for libel, but the case was thrown out. Brittle says that he has hundreds of hours of interviews with the family supporting this story. As a final note, before we move on to the next story, based on the note Carl found in his mother's belongings, which said, "Well, the family has had their medicine tonight and everything was good." It was Carl's belief that his mother, Judy, had been giving the family Sominex in their food every night. He believes this resulted in hallucinations and mood swings as side effects of prolonged drug use, and that it was this that manifested David's possession. He also believes that Bono's murder at the hands of Arne had nothing to do with David's exorcism at all. Hallucinations are rarely a side effect of Sominex, and if his mother was poisoning his family, they had serious other problems, but that's besides the point. Little is known about Emma Schmidt's first exorcism, which occurred on June 18, 1912, when Emma was 30 years old. The exorcist, Father Theophilus Reisinger, considered the exorcism a success, but it wouldn't be the last time he and Schmidt would cross paths. Emma was born in 1882 by some sources in Wisconsin, by other sources in Switzerland, and then her family emigrated to Wisconsin in 1884. Regardless, Her mother passed when Emma was very young, and she was raised by her alcoholic father, Jacob, and her aunt Mina, who was also her father's lover. By the age of 14, Emma had strong reactions when entering a church. She would have violent thoughts of smashing the vessels of holy water and harming the priests. She would recoil at the sight of consecrated items and refuse to take Holy Communion. By 16, she couldn't even enter a church at all. It isn't exactly clear why it took 2 decades for Emma to get help, but it is noted that she believed her father had cursed her due to her refusal of his sexual advances and that her aunt was a witch who put herbs in her food. The second exorcism started on April 18th, 1928. Father Reisinger had approached his friend, Father Joseph Steiger, who was a priest in a very remote town of Erling, Iowa. A Franciscan convent was there, which made for a good location to host an exorcism in secrecy. The nuns strapped the 46-year-old Emma Schmidt to an iron bed. She refused to eat any food that was brought in because it was blessed. When Father Reisinger begun the rites of exorcism, Emma went into a sedated trance as if she was unconscious. But this didn't last. She woke up and tore herself out of the restraints. Leaping from the bed, she climbed up the wall, lodging herself above the doorframe. Eventually, the nuns were able to get her down and back into the bed, but she began screaming and howling and speaking in multiple languages, many of which she didn't know. She spat and cursed at Father Reisinger and the nuns, and answered his questions in English, German, and Latin. It is believed that Emma was possessed by her own father, her Aunt Mina, Judas Iscariot, and Beelzebub himself. The first session ended on August 26th, but did not successfully banish the demons. 2 more sessions occurred from September 13th to the 20th and December 15th to the 23rd. Schmidt's body writhed and contorted. She continuously vomited bile and what looked like tobacco despite sustaining herself on nothing but milk and water. The battle was emotionally and physically draining on everyone involved. Several nuns at the convent requested transfers. Even those that didn't rotated in and out of the room. The only one who had the stamina for the daily battle was Father Reisinger. Father Steiger asked his friend to take Emma elsewhere to finish the ritual, but Father Reisinger asked him to just wait till the end of the week. On that Friday, Father Steiger was in a car accident. Although he survived with only minor injuries, the priest was plagued by a stream of unhealthy sounds that wouldn't allow him to sleep through the night. On December 23rd, 1928, Emma became suddenly alert. Beelzebub, Judas, Jacob, Mina. Hell, hell, hell. From what a terrible burden I have been freed at last. My Jesus, mercy. Praise be Jesus Christ. For the first time in decades, Emma was free from torment. The exorcism was a success. Despite the best efforts of Fathers Reisinger and Steiger to keep the exorcism quiet, Reverend Karl Vogel revealed the story to the public in 1935, publishing a 48-page pamphlet entitled Begone, Satan, to encourage those of strong faith to continue to give battle to the evil one. The story quickly got picked up by Time magazine and other news outlets. It was filled with eyewitness accounts of Father Steiger's housekeeper and several of the nuns who were present. I've included a link to the pamphlet in the notes for those who are interested. In April of 1991, the ABC network show 2020 took that based on a true story tagline one step further when they aired an exorcism on television. It was a controversial moment of television history, which Newsweek called little more than the gratuitous torment of a deeply disturbed young girl. The girl in question was a 16-year-old girl referred to only as Gina. she was said to be possessed. She was already in a children's hospital in Miami for weeks of psychiatric treatment before the church gave its backing for an exorcism. And she continued to be in psychiatric treatment after the exorcism was complete. Many have called this tabloid journalism, a desperate attempt at views. If that's the case, it certainly worked. They got more than 29 million views for that episode, more than any other episode of 2020. On the other side of the argument is that they were making the public aware of the evil in the world. Certainly, the medieval images, dramatic music, growling demon voice in the introduction show seems to lean towards sensationalism.
You've seen it in the movie. Tonight, a true exorcism. An eerie, chilling, mesmerizing ritual performed by Roman Catholic priests.
In the name of Jesus Christ, I demand the spirit of evil to leave now.
We don't want to leave. We don't want Gina.
The church insists demonic spirits plague this teenage girl. John Cardinal O'Connor has warned that Satan is among us. His evil spreading.
Sinners! You're getting murdered. Why are they coming? You understand?
2020 followed this story for 12 months. Tonight, Tom Gerald takes you inside the Catholic Church for an extraordinary event never before seen on American television. The Exorcism.
If you want to watch the full episode, I've provided the link below. What you will see is a young girl held down by several people, while a priest, Father A, whose face is blurred out for anonymity, performs the rites of exorcism. Gina growls and screams and talks in a low, guttural voice. She declares that she is possessed by two spirits, Zion and Minga. Father A, in a moment of dramatic television, presses a cross against Gina's forehead while he prays. Father A is one of two priests granted permission by the Archbishop of New York to perform the ritual. The second priest was Reverend James LeBaire, who is noted as the chief exorcist of New York. In one interview with LeBaire, when asked about Gina's diagnosis, he merely says, just because it's psychotic doesn't necessarily exclude the presence of demons. After the televised exorcism concluded, Gina was still hearing voices in her home, and a second exorcism was performed off camera. She then went back to the psych ward for 2 weeks, where they started her on a new medication. Her therapist says that she was more lucid than she had been in years, and was finally able to have behavioral techniques taught to her that had previously been impossible. So was this a win for the church or a win for psychology? Maybe a bit of both. I think the psychiatrist / Jesuit priest they interviewed that day said it best. Even if she's not possessed, if she believes the exorcism will help, it probably will. As far as sensationalism goes, what caused ABC to air this program in the first place is no different than what made me create 2 episodes dedicated to exorcisms, and no different than what had you watch it. 29 million people tuned into the topic because it's fascinating. It is an exaggeration of the battle of good and evil that happens inside every one of us each day. It doesn't matter if you believe in God or the devil. That fear that exists of losing control of yourself to an outside force can still be present. That's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Until next time, I'm Christopher Damian. This is History, Mystery, and the Unexplained. And thank you for listening.